The wheel broke just after sundown. Clara Whitmore heard the crack before she felt the fall. A hard, dry snap cut through the storm. Then the whole coach lurched sideways like some great animal shot through the ribs. Her shoulder struck the door. Glass burst. The world turned white, black, white again. Then there was only snow in her mouth. She lay half buried in a ditch beside the Blackwood Road, one boot gone, her cheek pressed to frozen mud. The coach sat 20 yards off, tipped against a pine, its lantern swinging from a bent iron hook. The flame inside it sputtered low, thin as a dying match. "Mr. Hale," she called. The driver did not answer. The storm took her voice and tore it up. Clara pushed one hand under her chest and tried to rise. Her fingers would not hold the ground. They looked strange in the snow, pale and stiff, as if they belonged to some other poor woman. Her wedding contract, folded in oilcloth, was still tied inside her coat. She had held it through 3 counties, 2 bad inns, and 1 crossing where the river ice groaned under the horses. A husband she had never seen waited somewhere beyond these trees. Or maybe he did not wait at all. The wind shoved at her back. Snow slid down her collar and melted against her neck. She crawled toward the coach because crawling was all that remained. Her breath came out in broken little pulls. Each one scraped her throat raw. Inside the wreck, one horse kicked once, then stopped. Clara reached the lantern and hooked 2 fingers around the step. Her gloves were gone. The iron burned cold against her skin. She pulled herself up inch by inch and saw Mr. Hale lying beneath the front board with his hat still on his head and blood frozen dark along his beard. She shut her eyes. Not long, just long enough for the snow to crust on her lashes. A sound rose from the trees, low, thin, then answered by another farther up the ridge. Wolves. Clara turned her head. Between the black pines, pale shapes moved where no pale shape ought to move. One pair of eyes held steady green-yellow in the lantern glow. "No," she said. Her lips barely moved. She grabbed at the coach seat, found her leather satchel, half buried under torn blankets, and dragged it to her chest. The strap wrapped round her wrist. Her father's chemical kit clinked inside. Useless now. Bottles and powders and neat brass tools, all made for classrooms, rivers, and quiet tables. Not for a widow before she was wife. A branch cracked. The nearest wolf stepped clear of the pines. Clara tried to stand. Her knees folded. Snow took her again, soft and deep like a grave that had been waiting with its mouth open. Hoofbeats came through the storm. Not many. 1 horse. Slow. The wolf froze, ears sharp. A dark shape moved beyond it, taller than the brush, broad across the shoulders, bent against the wind. For one broken breath, Clara thought death had put on a coat and come walking. Then a man's voice cut the air. "Get!" The word was low, but it carried iron. The wolf backed 2 steps. A rifle lever clicked. "Get gone." The shot split the night. Snow dropped from the pines in heavy clumps. The wolves scattered into the dark like ash blown from a stove. The man came to her and dropped to one knee. Ice clung to his beard. His hat brim was white. His eyes, set deep beneath it, looked at her face, her hands the blue line at her mouth. "Can you hear me?" Clara tried to answer. Her teeth knocked too hard. He stripped off one glove and touched 2 fingers beneath her jaw. His skin was rough and warm. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. He lifted her like she weighed no more than wet laundry. Pain burst bright in her hands when they struck his coat. She made a sound she did not know was hers. "I know," he said. "Hold to me anyway." She could not hold. Her arms hung dead, so he held for both of them. The ride had no shape. Only the pound of hooves under them, the smell of horse sweat and leather, the man's chest hard against her side. Once she woke enough to see his cabin lamp through the snow, a small yellow square fighting the whole mountain. Then cedar. Smoke. Black coffee burned bitter in a pot. He set her before the hearth, and cut the frozen laces from her bodice with a hunting knife, keeping his eyes turned when cloth loosened. He wrapped her in a wool blanket, then took her hands between his own. The first rub made fire bite clean to the bone. Clara jerked. "Don't pull away," he said. "It hurts." "Good." He worked each finger slow hard, as if he could force life back through skin and nail. His thumbs were scarred. One knuckle sat crooked, badly healed. He did not speak again. The room filled with the pop of pine sap, the hiss of melting snow from his coat, and Clara's breath catching each time feeling returned. At last she opened her eyes. The man sat close enough for the firelight to show the old cut along his jaw and the gray in his dark hair. Not young, not gentle, not handsome in any polished way, but alive. And he had brought her with him, Silas Thorne, she asked. His hands stopped around hers. Before he could answer, something struck the cabin door hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. Once, twice. Then came the drag of iron chain across the porch boards. Silas rose without haste. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Not quick, not startled. He set her hands down inside the blanket stood and took the rifle from beside the mantel, as if he had known that knock would come. The chain dragged again. "Open up, Thorne." Silas crossed the room. His boots left wet marks on the pine floor. He lifted the bar. The door blew inward with snow and a man in a buffalo coat. Deputy Cobb stepped over the sill like the cabin was his. Iron manacles hung from one fist. His cheeks were red from drink and cold. Two riders waited behind him, their horses stamping white smoke into the night. "Well now," Cobb said, eyes sliding to Clara by the fire. "A bride in the wolf weather. Didn't figure you for the marrying kind." Silas kept the rifle low. "Say your piece." Cobb pulled a folded paper from his coat and slapped it against Silas's chest. "Order of seizure, signed by Mayor Horace Vance. Your cattle are marked diseased. Water below your place has gone foul. Until the court sits, this ranch is held by town authority." Clara tightened the blanket under her chin. The fire snapped behind her. Her fingers still throbbed, each nail beating like a tiny hammer. Silas did not unfold the paper. Cobb grinned. "You heard me, I heard. Then you'll clear out come morning. House, stock, land, spring rights. All of it." A muscle jumped once in Silas's jaw. Clara watched for denial, for rage, for anything. He gave nothing. Cobb leaned closer. "Folks say bad luck follows you, Thorne. First that business at Red Gulch, now poisoned water. Maybe Blackwood's had enough of your shadow." The room grew still except for the coffee pot ticking on the stove. Silas's hand closed on the paper. "Get out." Cobb's grin thinned. "Sun up. Don't make me bring more iron." He turned, and as he crossed the floor, clumps of mud broke from his boot soles. Not brown mud, not black mountain slush. Yellow, bright against the pine boards. The deputy stepped into the storm. Silas shut the door and dropped the bar back in place. For a while he stood with his back to Clara. Then he tore the order open. His eyes moved once down the page. He folded it again neat and slow and laid it on the table. "You can sleep till first light," he said. "I'll hitch the wagon and take you to town." Clara stared at him. "Town? This marriage is done." The words struck harder than the cold had. She pushed herself up on one elbow. "I came 300 miles with your name in my coat. You came to a man who had land. I came to a man." His mouth tightened. "You don't know what you came to." He took a cup from the shelf and poured tea from a blackened kettle. His hands were steady, but the cup knocked once against the saucer before he set it beside her. Clara did not drink at first. Her eyes went past the cup to the floor. Yellow mud. 3 small smears by the door. One thicker clod near the table leg. She knew that color. Her father had kept jars of it in a locked drawer. She reached for her leather satchel. Silas turned. "Leave that." She ignored him. Her fingers fumbled with the buckle. Pain made her teeth meet, but she got it open. Inside, wrapped in flannel, lay a narrow wood case. She lifted the brass latch and took out a glass tube, a stoppered bottle, and a thin iron spoon no longer than a child's finger. Silas watched her kneel beside the mud. "What are you doing?" "Listening to what that man's boots told us." She scraped a grain of yellow earth into the tube, added clear liquid. 1 drop. 2. The mixture hissed. A red thread climbed through the glass, darkening fast, thick as fresh blood. Clara looked up. Silas had gone white beneath the firelight. "That is not cow sickness," she said. He stepped toward her, then just as the red reached the top of the tube, and on the table between them the marriage paper lay cold and unsigned. Silas did not touch the glass tube. He looked at it like it might strike. The red in it held thick against the firelight, and the sour smell rising from the mud took Clara back to her father's workshed in Ohio, where jars lined the walls, and every label was written in a hand too careful for a world this cruel. "Where did that come from?" Silas asked. "From Cobb's boots." "That ain't an answer." "It is the only answer that matters." She pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees shook under the blanket, but she stayed standing. The tube trembled between her fingers. "This is sulfur earth, not pasture rot, not cattle sickness. Sulfur and mine wash. Somebody is cutting old rock open above your water." Silas's eyes moved toward the black window. "There's no working mine here." "No," Clara said, "but there is an abandoned one." His head turned back slow. "Black Spur Ridge," she said. 3 miles above your spring." Silas took 1 step, then stopped. How do you know that Clara set the tube on the table and reached again into her satchel? Beneath the chemical case lay a flat oilskin packet. She opened it with fingers that still would not bend right. A map came free. Old paper, creased white at the folds, marked in brown ink, blue ink, and her father's sharp little notes along the edge. Silas came closer despite himself. The cabin seemed to shrink around them. Fire behind, storm outside, the yellow mud on the floor, the unsigned contract on the table. Between them, the map. "My father surveyed water tables before fever took him," Clara said. "He said clean water was worth more than gold because a man could live without gold." Silas stared down. Clara tapped a blue line drawn beneath his land. "Here, a spring vein runs under your lower pasture, deep and clean, enough to feed this whole valley if kept pure." His hand went flat on the table. Scarred knuckles, torn nails, work ground into every line of him. "Vance tried to buy that pasture last winter," he said. "How many times 4? And when you refused, your cattle turned sick." He said nothing. The coffee pot gave a low boil on the stove. Outside, the wind pressed snow against the shutters with a dry, scratching sound, like fingernails looking for a way in. Silas turned from the map and reached for the marriage paper. Clara caught his wrist. He looked down at her hand on him. She almost let go. Then she tightened her grip. "You saved my life," she said. "Do not hand yours to a thief." His mouth worked once, but no words came. She took the contract from beneath his palm and laid it beside the map. "You think sending me away keeps me clean of this? I was in that ditch with wolves at my face. I have already seen what this place costs." Silas leaned back the chair, groaning under him. "Red Gulch," he said at last. "Cobb named it to get under my hide. I lost men there. Bad air in a shaft. I was foreman. I heard them knocking from inside the rock till they quit." The fire popped. Clara did not move. "When snow closes in," he said, "or earth sits too near overhead, my lungs forget they belong to me." Clara took a loaf from the warming shelf, broke it, and pushed half across the table. "Then we keep the roof above us," she said. His eyes rose to hers. For the first time he took the bread. A blast split the mountain. The table jumped. The lamp swung hard. One shelf tore loose and clay plates shattered across the floor. Silas was on his feet before the second roar came. Not thunder. Powder. He seized Clara and dragged her beneath the main beam as the whole cabin groaned. Outside the ridge answered with a sound too big for any living throat. Snow broke loose by the tons. It came down the mountain like judgment swallowing trees, fence-yard sky. The windows went black. The roof cracked. And the last thing Clara saw was Silas throwing his body over hers as the cabin vanished under the weight of the white dark. At first Clara thought night had fallen twice. No fire, no window, no storm sound, only timber creaking above her and Silas's weight across her ribs. Silas. He shifted, bracing on one arm so his chest lifted off her. Snow sifted through a split beam and powdered his hat brim. The hearth had gone black. One red coal showed in the ash. "You hurt?" he asked. Clara drew breath. It came thin and dusty. "I can move." He found the oilskin map by touch and pushed it toward her. The cabin was not a cabin anymore. It was a box under a mountain. The roof sagged low enough that Silas had to crawl. The front door had disappeared behind packed snow. Both windows were sealed black. The air smelled of wet wool soot, spilled coffee, and the sharp yellow bite from Cobb's mud still smeared on the boards. Silas struck a match. The flame showed his face for 1 second. Then his breath changed. It stopped being breath. It came short, fast, useless. His shoulders drew up tight. His hand clawed at his collar like there was a rope. "Too close," he said. The match went out. Clara heard his boots scrape backward until his spine hit the fallen beam. Wood groaned over them. Snow pressed harder. The whole dark room seemed to lower by inches. Silas. No answer. She crawled through splinters and cold ash until her knees struck his boot. She found his hand. It shook so hard his knuckles knocked against the floor. "Give me your eyes." "Can't." "Then give me your hand." His fingers closed around hers. Too hard. Pain shot through her thawed skin, but she did not pull away. "Listen to me. Not the roof. Not the snow, me." His breath tore in and out. She put his palm flat against her chest. "In with me." She breathed slow, though the air scratched her throat. "Out with me." For a long minute there was only that. Her breath first. His chasing it. Missing it. Finding it. Losing it again. Then his shoulders dropped. His fingers loosened enough that blood came back into hers in hot needles. "There," she said. "You are in your house with me. Not Red Gulch." His forehead lowered until it touched their joined hands. "We ain't got long," he said. "I know." The words helped because they were true. Clara turned her face upward. No wind, no crack of light. But cold air lived low along the floor, sliding against her cheek. Heat, what little remained, had climbed toward the chimney. If the chimney still stood, there might be space above it where snow had not packed solid. "The flue," she said. Silas lifted his head. "Smoke rises because warm air pulls up. If we can open the chimney throat, we make a pipe. That chimney is under the slide, not all of it. Stone holds shape better than pine." He crawled to the hearth. Clara followed, carrying the last match and the iron spoon from her kit. The chimney mouth was choked with snow and fallen mortar. Silas took an unburned log, black at one end, and drove it upward. Nothing moved. Again. Stone scraped. Snow fell in chunks, filling his sleeves and beard. His breath began to run wild, but Clara set one hand between his shoulder blades. "Count my taps," she said. "Tap, tap, tap." He struck with the log on each third tap. Harder, cleaner. The chimney coughed gray powder into their faces. Then came a pinhole of pale light, small as a nailhead. Air slid through it. Clara opened her mouth and let it touch her tongue. Cold, clean, real. Silas kept digging. The hole widened to the size of his fist. Snow dust fell silver in the thin shaft of morning. Then boards creaked above them. Not the roof. Footsteps. A man's boot pressed somewhere over the buried cabin. Another followed. Voices came muffled through the snow. Mayor Vance laughed clear enough for both of them to hear. Dig slow, boys. No need hurrying for a dead man. Silas went still beneath the chimney, and the light on his face turned hard as hammered iron. 3 days later, the saloon was packed tight enough to sweat in winter. Men stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the hanging lamps. Women filled the back wall with shawls drawn close. Ranch hands leaned on posts. Storekeepers held their hats in both hands. At the front, Judge Merriweather sat behind a card table, his gavel beside an ink bottle. Mayor Horace Vance stood near him, in a clean black coat, smiling like Sunday money. On the wall hung a board. Auction of Thorne Property. Lot 1 Lower Pasture and Spring Rights. Clara saw those words through the swinging doors before she stepped inside. Silas came in beside her. The room lost its voice. Cards stopped mid-air. A glass halted at a man's mouth. Deputy Cobb's chair scraped the floor as he stood too quick. Silas looked leaner than before. Snowburn marked one cheek raw. His coat was torn at the shoulder. Clara had a strip of linen wrapped around 2 fingers, and her dress still carried soot in the hem. Vance's smile stayed put, but his eyes did not. Well, he said, Blackwood has seen a ghost. Silas said nothing. Clara walked past him. Every boot in that room turned toward her as she crossed the sawdust floor and set her satchel on the judge's table. Judge Merriweather blinked. Madam, this is a legal proceeding, so it ought to have evidence. She opened the satchel. First came the oilskin map. She spread it flat with both hands. The Federal Survey seal, faded but plain, sat in the lower corner. Then came 3 pages in her father's hand. Then 2 glass tubes wrapped in cloth. Cobb muttered something and took 1 step back. Clara pointed to the map. This is the spring vein under Mr. Thorne's land. Clean water. Deep water. Enough to make a dry valley rich. Vance gave a short laugh. A bride with a parlor map. Clara did not look at him. She lifted the first tube. This is mud from Deputy Cobb's boot the night he brought the seizure order. The room shifted. She lifted the second. This is soil taken yesterday from the wash below the abandoned mine on Black Spur Ridge. A rancher near the stove leaned forward. That mine's Vance's. Vance's head snapped toward him. Clara set both tubes in front of the judge and added drops from a stoppered bottle. The saloon went so quiet, the lamp flame could be heard feeding on oil. Both tubes hissed. Both turned red. Judge Merriweather stood. Clara's voice cut clean. Sulfur wash. Mine poison. Not cattle sickness. Mayor Vance fouled the water above Thorne land, then used the foul water to seize the land below it. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Old Mr. Pike, whose boy had lost 6 calves that week, pushed away from the wall. You did that to our creek, Vance raised both hands. This is witch bottle foolishness. Clara slid the written report across the table. My father served Federal Survey contracts in Ohio and Missouri. His seal is here. His method is here. Any chemist in Denver can repeat it. The judge bent over the page. His brows came down. Silas moved, then slow from the door to Clara's side. Vance's face changed in small pieces. The smile went first, then the color above his collar, then the softness around his mouth. You think a dead man's notes and a woman's tricks can strip me in my own town? Clara turned to him at last. No, she said. Your boots did. Cobb looked down. The whole room looked with him. Yellow mud still clung in the cracks of his heel. A growl passed through the crowd, low and human. Vance's hand flicked. Two men by the far wall reached beneath their coats. Silas stepped in front of Clara. No rush. No flourish. Just the scrape of his boot, the set of his shoulders, and his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. The saloon held its breath as 3 hammers clicked back in the same dead second. Judge Merriweather's gavel struck the table so hard the ink bottle jumped. "Holster them." No one moved. The judge stood thin as a fence rail, his beard trembling under his chin. "Sheriff Boone, if one pistol clears leather in this room, I will see that hand buried under the jailhouse." Sheriff Boone stepped out from by the stove with a shotgun laid across both arms. "You heard him." Vance's 2 men looked at Silas. Silas did not blink. His thumb rested on the hammer. Clara felt the heat of his back between her and the room. One gun belt hit the floor, then another. Vance turned on the sheriff. "I own your badge." Boone worked tobacco in his jaw and spat near Vance's boot. "Turns out you rented it." He took the mayor's pistol himself. Deputy Cobb edged toward the side door, but old Mr. Pike stuck out one boot, and Cobb went down among spilled beer. The crowd did not laugh. Iron went around Vance's wrists, then Cobb's, then the 2 hired gunmen. Judge Merriweather gathered Clara's papers and pressed them flat beneath his hand. "This seizure is void," he said. "Silas Thorne keeps his land, his stock, and his spring. Charges will be carried to the territorial court." Silas's hand left his gun. Only then did Clara find she had been holding her breath. Outside, the storm had passed. Sun lay sharp on the windows. Silas turned to her. In front of the whole town, with soot on her dress and bandages on her fingers, he took off his hat. "Mrs. Thorne," he said low enough that only she heard it right. Clara looked at the unsigned contract tucked in her satchel. Then she looked back at him. "We ought to put ink to that before you forget yourselves." His mouth bent small and rough like it had not practiced such a thing in years. Spring came late to Blackwood, but when it came strong. The snow pulled back from the lower pasture in dirty folds. Water ran clear over stone. Grass showed first in thin green blades beside the spring, then spread down the hill until calves stood knee-deep in it, bawling for their mothers with milk on their noses. The cabin roof was mended. New pine boards shone pale where the slide had broken them. Cedar smoke rose straight from the chimney. No chain marked the porch. No yellow mud stained the floor. Inside, apple pie cooled on the table, heavy with cinnamon and brown sugar. Clara stood at the stove rolling dough with flour on her wrist, and one loose curl stuck to her cheek. The kitchen window was open. Warm wind moved through, carrying the sound of water and cattle. Silas came in behind her and shut the door with his heel. "You aim to feed every soul from here to Denver. You aim to complain after your 3rd slice." He set his arms around her, careful of the fingers that still stiffened some mornings. His beard brushed her temple. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet was not empty now. It had bread in it, firewood, hoofbeats, the small scrape of Clara's rolling pin. A house learning how to hold 2 lives without breaking. Silas lowered his mouth to her hair. "I had no right to ask you to stay." "You did not ask?" "No." Her hands stopped on the dough. "I stayed anyway." She turned in his arms. The flower on her wrist marked his sleeve. She took his broad hand and laid it flat and slow against the slight swell beneath her apron. Silas did not breathe. Outside, a calf called once. Clara smiled up at him. "Seems the storm left us more than a roof to mend." His knees gave first. He sank to the floor before her, his hand still held to her, his forehead bowing against the cloth of her apron. One tear slid through the dust on his cheek. "Thank you," he said. Not to Clara alone, to the water running clean under his land, to the grave he had not gone into, to the woman who had come through snow with his